The coroner hadn't finished zipping the body bag when my phone rang. A voice I'd never heard, steady as a surgeon's hand, said 4 words that gutted me. She built a life with me you never knew existed. I gripped the kitchen counter, my knuckles white against the marble. "Who is this?" He laughed softly. "The man your wife came home to every Wednesday and Friday for 22 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. To the moment the first call came through, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage began to collapse like a building with its foundation pulled out from underneath. The tea was still warm when the hospital called. I was sitting in the living room of our Charleston home, the one on Laguerre Street in the south of Broad District, watching steam curl from a ceramic mug of Earl Grey, the same blend I'd been drinking since my residency days, back when sleep was a luxury and caffeine was the only constant. Nadine had poured it for me that morning before she left. Kissed my cheek. Told me she was flying to Seattle to visit her college roommate for a few days. The clock on the mantel read 8:47 in the evening. Outside, the cicadas were screaming the way they do in Charleston summers. A sound so constant, you forget it's there, until the silence reminds you. I'd spent the afternoon reviewing patient referral files from the medical school. Old habits. Even after retiring from 30 years of cardiac surgery at the Medical University of South Carolina, my hands still wanted something to do. The phone buzzed on the side table. Portland area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Mr. Arden. This is Dr. Claiborne from Oregon Health and Science University Medical Center." His tone carried that practiced gentleness I recognized immediately. I'd used it myself, hundreds of times. Standing beside hospital beds delivering news that would rearrange someone's life. "I'm very sorry. Your wife suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage at approximately 2:38 this afternoon. By the time paramedics arrived, the damage was catastrophic. She was pronounced dead at 4:11. 2:38. 6 hours ago. While I'd been reviewing files and waiting for Nadine to text me that she'd landed safely in Seattle, she'd been dying on the floor of a building in Portland, Oregon. Not Seattle. Portland. 2,800 miles from our kitchen. 2,800 miles from the mug she'd poured that morning, which still sat on the counter with her lipstick print on the rim. "I understand," I heard myself say. The words came out the way they always did, when my surgical training took over. Calm, measured, detached from the earthquake happening inside my chest. Where exactly did this happen? A pause. Papers shuffling. She was found at a commercial address in the Pearl District, 741 Northwest Gleason Street. An employee at the location called 911, Pearl District. I'd never been to Portland in my life. Nadine had never mentioned a reason to go there. She'd said Seattle. She'd said her roommate Karen. She'd kissed my cheek with lips that apparently held a geography my marriage had never contained. "I'll need to make arrangements," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone standing very far away. Dr. Claiborne was still explaining procedures, personal effects, paperwork, autopsy requirements for sudden death cases, when my phone buzzed with a second incoming call. Unknown number, same Portland area code. I thanked the doctor, my mouth operating on autopilot, while my brain tried to reconcile the fact that my wife of 26 years had died in a city she wasn't supposed to be in. I switched lines. "This is about the 220,000. The voice was male. Sharp. Unhurried. Carrying the particular kind of entitlement that comes from believing you're owed something. "Nadine said you'd handle the balance. The restoration contract is 60 days overdue." I stood up too quickly. The room tilted. The cicadas outside suddenly sounded like static, white noise filling the spaces between his words and my comprehension. "What contract? Who is this?" "The work's been completed. Materials, labor, authentication fees. Your wife signed the agreement. She guaranteed payment from your accounts. My wife just died." The sentence felt impossible, like trying to hold water in a fist. A pause. Barely a breath. "I'm sorry for your loss. But business is business." She gave her word. "Who are you?" Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The impatience was still there, but underneath it was something else. Possessiveness. The quiet certainty of a man who knows he belongs somewhere. She built a life with me you never knew existed. Every Wednesday. Every Friday. For 22 years, Mr. Arden. I was the one she came home to. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone. The Earl Grey growing cold on the counter beside Nadine's lipstick print. The cicadas screamed. The clock ticked. The house settled around me the way old Charleston houses do, creaking with the weight of history and humidity and secrets stored in the walls. 2 facts. Irreconcilable. Nadine was dead. Found in a city she'd told me she wasn't going to, inside a building I'd never heard of, surrounded by a life that apparently had nothing to do with me. And a stranger. A man whose voice carried the familiarity of someone who knew my wife's promises and habits and financial arrangements, had just told me he'd been the other half of her existence for more than 2 decades. 22 years. Longer than some marriages. Longer than my surgical career. Nearly as long as Audrey's entire life. I looked down at my hands. The left one still had a faint ink smudge from the death certificate information I'd started writing down when Dr. Claiborne was talking. Her name. Date of birth. Time of death. 2:38 in the afternoon. A Wednesday. She died on a Wednesday. One of his days. I set the phone down beside the cold tea and walked to the window. The garden was dark, but I could smell the magnolias Nadine had planted the year we moved in. Their sweetness drifted through the screen like a memory that didn't know it was already gone. Somewhere in Portland, a building I'd never seen held answers to questions I hadn't known to ask, and a man whose name I didn't yet know was waiting to be paid for 22 years of a life my wife had hidden inside the ordinary rhythms of our marriage. Every Wednesday. Every Friday. While I poured her tea. While I kissed her goodbye. While I believed, with the complete certainty of a man who trusted his own diagnosis, that I knew exactly who she was. 4 days between death and burial. 4 days of condolence calls. Flower deliveries. And a question I couldn't stop turning over in my mind like a stone with something sharp hidden underneath. Who was the man on the phone? Thank you for being here with me. Before we go further, leave a comment and tell me what you're doing while you listen. Driving, working, taking a quiet moment for yourself. I read every single one, and your perspective matters to me. One quick note. Some details in this story have been adjusted to protect the people involved and strengthen the message. What truly matters is the lesson it carries. Joel flew in from the hospital on Thursday morning. He'd been working a double shift in the emergency department at the medical university when I called him. 23 years old. Already building a reputation as one of the steadiest nurses on the trauma floor. The kind of person who could hold a dying stranger's hand and still chart vitals with the other. Now he stood in the doorway of our Lagar Street house with a duffel bag over his shoulder and grief carved into his face like something physical. He crossed the foyer in 3 steps and wrapped his arms around me. Didn't say a word. Just held on. I could feel his shoulders shaking. And for the first time since Dr. Claiborne's call, something cracked inside my chest that I couldn't seal back up with surgical precision. "I'm here, Dad," he said finally. His voice was rough and raw. "Whatever you need." What I needed was answers. But funerals don't wait for answers. They run on their own schedule, built from casket selections and hymn choices and the impossible task of summarizing a human being in a printed program. Joel handled most of it. He sat across from me at the kitchen table making decisions about flower arrangements and reception catering because I couldn't seem to hold a thought longer than 30 seconds before the stranger's voice crept back in. Every Wednesday. Every Friday. 22 years. Audrey called from Brooklyn that night. She'd transferred to the Smithsonian's East Coast office 2 years ago, working as a curator in the Antiquities Preservation Department. Her voice cracked with theatrical precision when I answered. "I'll be on the first flight tomorrow," she sobbed. "Oh God, Dad. I can't believe she's gone. We need to stay strong for each other." I wanted to believe the grief in her voice was genuine. I wanted it the way you want anesthesia, before the blade touches skin. Desperately. And without conditions. Saturday arrived, draped in rain. Charleston rain. The kind that falls warm and heavy and smells like salt and turned earth. Street. Michael's Church on Meeting Street was built in 1752, and the interior carried the quiet gravity of a space that had held 3 centuries of sorrow. Dark wood pews, white plaster walls, the faint scent of old hymnals mixed with the overpowering sweetness of white lilies banked around the altar. I stood at the entrance in a suit that suddenly didn't fit, shaking hands with faces that blurred together. Colleagues from the medical school. Neighbors from Lagar Street. A surprising number of people I had never seen before in my life. Audrey swept in 20 minutes before the service. Black designer dress, oversized sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She embraced me with a force that felt calculated for the room. The kind of hug that says, "Look how much I love him rather than I need you." "Dad." She pressed her face into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I'm here now. We'll get through this together." Over her shoulder, I caught Joel's eye from across the vestibule. He looked at Audrey, then at me, then away. Something passed across his face that I couldn't quite read. The service was a blur of eulogies delivered by people who described a version of Nadine I recognized but couldn't quite reach. Gifted restorer, devoted wife, beloved mother. Each word traveled through water before it landed. I sat in the front pew listening to strangers describe my wife with an intimacy that made my skin tighten. How did they know about her habit of humming Debussy while she worked? When had she told them about the summer we spent in Provence? The reception afterward filled the parish hall with murmured condolences and plates of finger sandwiches nobody touched. I was standing near the window watching rain streak down the glass when 2 men appeared at my elbow. Dark suits, polished shoes, the rigid posture of people who deliver documents for a living. I'd never seen either of them. The taller one extended a thick manila envelope. The words "Urgent, Estate Settlement" were printed in red across the front. "Mr. Arden," he said quietly, "our sincere condolences. This requires your immediate attention. Who sent you?" "The firm of Mercer and Fontaine, standing instructions in the event of Miss Fontaine's passing." He said it like he was reading from a card. Practiced, rehearsed. Fontaine. Nadine's maiden name. A name I'd last seen on our marriage certificate 26 years ago, now attached to a firm that had sent representatives to her funeral with a contract marked urgent before her body was cold. They nodded once and disappeared into the crowd before I could form another question. I stood there holding the envelope, feeling its weight. Legal documents by the thickness. 40 pages at least. Joel materialized beside me. "Who were those guys?" "I have no idea." The service was ending. People filed past the closed casket for final goodbyes. Rain hammered against the church windows with a ferocity that felt personal, as though the sky itself was trying to wash something clean. I watched Audrey from across the room. She stood near the portrait we'd chosen for the display, Nadine laughing in her restoration workshop during a visit I'd made years ago, afternoon light catching the silver threads in her dark hair. Audrey dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, accepting embraces from mourners with perfect posture and a grief so polished it could have been rehearsed in front of a mirror. Then her gaze shifted, not to the casket where her mother lay, not to the portrait, not to Joel, who was quietly thanking guests near the door. Audrey was looking at the envelope in my hands. Her eyes tracked it the way I'd seen traders track a stock price during volatile hours. Focused, calculating, hungry. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, her mask slipped. The grieving daughter vanished, and something else surfaced. Cold, patient, waiting. She caught me watching, and the mask snapped back like a rubber band. Fresh tears, trembling lip, a hand pressed to her collarbone. "Dad, are you okay? Do you need to sit down? You look pale," but I'd already seen it. 30 years of cardiac surgery teaches you to read vital signs that patients don't know they're displaying. The micro-expressions. The involuntary tells. The moment the body betrays what the mouth is hiding. I looked down at the envelope, then back at my daughter. Whatever was inside, Audrey already knew about it. She wasn't mourning her mother. She was monitoring a situation, and the two men who delivered this envelope had walked into my wife's funeral like they had standing orders. Because they did. Outside, the rain kept falling. Joel took my arm gently and led me toward the car. The envelope sat in my lap the entire drive home, heavy with the weight of questions multiplying faster than I could count them. My wife was buried. A stranger wanted $220,000. A firm bearing my wife's maiden name had sent legal documents to her funeral. And my daughter, the girl I'd raised from infancy, had looked at that envelope the way a surgeon looks at an exposed artery, with absolute precision and zero sentiment. Something was very wrong. And I was only beginning to understand how deep it went. Sleep wouldn't come. I lay in our bed, Nadine's side still dented from where she'd slept 2 mornings ago, and stared at the ceiling fan turning slow circles in the dark. The envelope from the funeral sat unopened on my desk in the next room. I told myself I'd read it in the morning when my head was clearer. But clarity wasn't coming. Every time I closed my eyes, the stranger's voice played on a loop. Every Wednesday. Every Friday. 22 years. At 11:15, I gave up pretending. Swung my legs out of bed, pulled on the robe Nadine had given me last Christmas, and walked down the hall to her home office. The door was closed. It was always closed. In 26 years of marriage, I'd respected that door the way I'd respected the boundary she'd drawn around her professional life. Her work was hers. Her space was hers. She'd built her restoration career independently, and I'd been proud of that. Proud that she didn't need my money or my guidance. Proud of the distance I now understood had been deliberate. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The room smelled like her. Vetiver and cedar and something faintly floral that I'd never been able to name. Her desk was oak, antique, something she'd restored herself when we first married. Shelves lined with reference books on furniture restoration, textile conservation, 18th century decorative arts. A framed photograph of the 4 of us at Joel's nursing school graduation sat beside her laptop. Normal, ordinary, the working space of a woman with nothing to hide. I opened the top drawer. Pens, business cards, loose receipts from art supply stores in Charleston. Nothing remarkable. The second drawer stuck when I pulled it. Something wedged at the back. I tugged harder, and it came free with a scrape of wood on wood. Inside, beneath a stack of fabric swatches and conservation samples, lay a leather appointment calendar, the kind Nadine preferred over digital. She'd always said she thought better on paper. I flipped it open to June. Her familiar handwriting filled the pages in careful blocks. Client consultations, vendor meetings, insurance appraisals. And there, every Wednesday and Friday, going back through the entire month, 2 letters in blue ink. C.M. I turned to May. C.M. Wednesday and Friday. April. Che.M. My hands weren't steady as I pulled out January, then reached deeper into the drawer for the previous year's calendar. C. M.C. M.C. M. Every Wednesday and Friday. Stretching back through month after month in an unbroken chain, I pulled out another calendar, then another. The oldest one in the drawer was dated 2008. 16 years of Wednesdays and Fridays. 16 years of 2 letters written in blue ink, with the casual regularity of someone recording the tide. Who the hell is C.M.? I said it out loud without meaning to. The sound of my own voice in the empty room startled me. It was almost midnight. I should stop, should go to bed, should leave this for morning. When grief hadn't turned me into a man rifling through his dead wife's desk like a detective processing a crime scene, I kept searching. The bottom drawer held archived tax files and old insurance documents. I almost closed it. Then my fingers, moving along the back panel the way they'd once moved along a patient's sternum feeling for abnormalities, brushed against something small and metallic, a key ring. I pulled it out carefully. 2 keys. One standard door key, brass, well-worn from use. One smaller, the kind that opens a safety deposit box or a storage unit. A white plastic tag was attached to the ring with a thin wire. On it, in Nadine's handwriting, a single line. Unit 7B. Pearl District. Portland. Portland. Where she died. In the Pearl District. At an address I'd never heard of until Dr. Claiborne read it off a form. I sat there in Nadine's chair, holding 2 keys to a place 2,800 miles away, feeling the architecture of my marriage shift beneath me like soil liquefying before a foundation gives way. Every Wednesday and Friday, she'd kissed me goodbye and told me she was heading to her workshop across town, or visiting a client in Savannah, or attending a restoration conference in Atlanta. Normal reasons, believable destinations, the kind of explanations that a trusting husband absorbs without question because the alternative is unthinkable. How many Wednesdays had I handed her a travel mug of Earl Grey and watched her pull out of the driveway, never suspecting she was heading to the airport? How many Fridays had I texted her drive safe while she was 35,000 feet above the Appalachians, flying toward a man whose initials she'd recorded in blue ink like a prayer she repeated twice a week? I called Joel at midnight. He answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep but instantly alert. Nurse's reflex. Always ready. Dad? What's wrong? Did your mother ever mention someone with the initials CM? A pause. I heard him sit up in bed. Sheets rustling. CM? No. Who is that? I don't know yet. Dad. What are you looking at? His voice had sharpened. The same tone he used when a patient's vitals shifted unexpectedly. Go back to sleep, I said. I'll explain tomorrow. That's not going to work. Talk to me. Tomorrow, Joel. I promise. I hung up before he could argue. Sat in the dark office holding the key ring against my palm, the metal slowly warming to my body temperature. The cicadas had finally gone quiet outside. Even they had run out of things to say. By 5:30 in the morning, I'd showered, dressed, and packed a single overnight bag. The envelope from the funeral went into the bag. The key ring went into my jacket pocket. I left a note for Joel on the kitchen counter. Gone to Portland. Back tomorrow. Don't worry. He would worry anyway. That's who he was. The drive to Charleston International took 20 minutes in pre-dawn traffic. I bought a one-way ticket to Portland at the United counter. The agent asked if I needed a return flight. I told her I didn't know yet. She gave me the careful smile that airline employees reserve for people who look like they haven't slept in days and are traveling towards something they can't explain. I boarded the 6:45 flight with the envelope on my lap and Nadine's keys in my pocket. Somewhere over Tennessee, the sun came up. I watched the light spread across the clouds below me and thought about all the times Nadine had made this same flight, sitting in a window seat just like this one, watching the same sunrise while I slept in Charleston believing she was somewhere she wasn't. The plane banked west over the Rockies. In 4 hours I'd be in Portland. In Nadine's other city. Standing in front of a door I had a key to but had never known existed. Whatever was behind that door, I was about to find out whether I was ready or not. Portland greeted me with fog. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind. The quiet, suffocating kind that erases the edges of buildings and makes every street corner look like it leads into nothing. I rented a car at the airport and drove toward the Pearl District with Nadine's keyring on the passenger seat beside the unopened envelope, 2 objects that somehow weighed more than everything I'd packed. The Pearl District was an old industrial neighborhood that had been converted into something polished. Brick warehouses turned into galleries and boutiques and high-end restaurants. The kind of transformation that looks effortless until you understand how much money it takes to make decay look fashionable. Nadine would have loved it. Or rather, Nadine had loved it. for 22 years, while I sat in Charleston, assuming she was somewhere else entirely. The storage facility sat on a side street wedged between a craft brewery and a framing studio. Concrete and steel, windowless, designed to hold other people's secrets. A small brass plaque beside the entrance read, "Pearl Vault, Private Storage." The lobby was empty except for a security guard behind reinforced glass who glanced at my signature on the visitor log without reading it. I took the stairs to the second floor. Unit 7B was the fourth door on the left. The hallway was climate-controlled and sterile, humming with the white noise of ventilation systems working to keep the air at precisely the right temperature for whatever people stored behind these locked doors. My hand shook as I fitted the smaller key into the lock. The vault door opened with a soft click. I stood there for a moment, one hand on the handle, listening to the sound settle into the silence. A small sound. The kind a surgeon hears when a clamp releases and the blood begins to flow again. The sound of something irreversible. The space inside was roughly 3 feet by 3 feet. Climate-controlled. Immaculate. No dust. No disorder. Everything arranged on built-in shelves with the precision of someone who understood that objects carry meaning and that meaning requires care. On the top shelf, a watch box. Black velvet, hinged. I lifted the lid. Inside, a Cartier tank watch. Men's style. Elegant, understated. The kind of piece that costs more than most people's cars but doesn't announce itself. I turned it over. The caseback was engraved in a serif font so small, I had to hold it close to read. C and N, 1993. 1993. The year Nadine and I were married. April 12th. Azaleas, blooming in the churchyard at Street Phillips. Her dress was ivory, not white. Because she said white was for people pretending to be something they weren't. C, for whoever CM was. N for Nadine. Matching watches engraved with our wedding year. While I'd been standing at the altar promising forever, someone else had already staked a claim on the same calendar. I set the watch down carefully. My surgical training kept my hands from trembling, but nothing in 30 years of medicine had prepared me for this particular kind of internal bleeding. Second shelf. A black leather folder, soft with use, stamped in gold lettering along the spine. Fontaine Heritage Plan. I didn't open it. Not yet. My fingers weren't ready for whatever financial architecture that title implied. Beside the folder, a USB drive in a small plastic case. Unmarked. And behind it, a Polaroid photograph in a clear, protective sleeve. I lifted the photograph the way I'd once lifted a newborn's heart during a transplant. Carefully, knowing that what I held was fragile and alive, with consequence. 3 people, photographed outdoors in golden afternoon light. A backyard somewhere, maybe a park. Trees in full summer green behind them. Nadine in the center, her head thrown back in laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from the belly and doesn't care who's watching. I hadn't seen her laugh like that in years, maybe longer. The realization stung worse than anything else in the vault. To her left, a man. Mid-50s. Weathered face, strong jaw. The kind of build that comes from working with your hands rather than sitting behind a desk. His arm was around Nadine's waist, not tentatively, not like a friend posing for a picture. Possessively, comfortably. The way a man holds a woman he considers his. To her right, a girl. 14, maybe 15. Dark hair pulled back in a braid. Delicate features. She was looking at Nadine with an expression I recognized because I'd seen it on Audrey's face at that age. Open adoration. Unguarded love. The kind of devotion a daughter gives to a mother she hasn't yet learned to question. Something about the girl's face made my breath catch. The shape of her eyes. The angle of her jaw. The way her smile curved slightly higher on the left side. The same asymmetry I'd noticed in Nadine's face 1,000 times, across 1,000 dinner tables. I turned the Polaroid over. Nadine's handwriting. Blue ink. Caleb. Nadine. And I. Summer 2023. 6 months ago. While I'd been planning a retirement trip to Italy, while we'd been having our quiet suppers and Saturday walks along the Battery, and all the comfortable rituals of a marriage I thought was real, she'd been standing in golden light with a man named Caleb, and a girl who had her eyes, building a family portrait that didn't include me. Caleb. C.M. The man from the phone call. The voice demanding $220,000. The man who'd said he'd been her partner for 22 years. Now I had a face to match the voice. And beside him, a child who looked so much like my wife that the resemblance felt like an accusation. I looked at the leather folder again. Fontaine Heritage Plan. Heritage. The word implies legacy, inheritance, something passed down from one generation to the next. The USB drive sat there, unmarked, patient, holding whatever digital evidence Nadine had considered important enough to store in a vault I wasn't supposed to find. I picked up the leather journal from the bottom shelf, the one I'd almost overlooked behind the folder. Small, hand-stitched binding, filled with dense columns of handwritten codes. I opened it to a random page. RT 1800 og 47 musk, VC 902, PKL 863 kold, FEDAG 911 har, Sen 800 og New Fiasiel. Letters and numbers arranged in groups of 3. The first set looked like abbreviations. The second set, 4-digit numbers, could be dates or catalog entries. The third set, I stared at the page until the letters rearranged themselves in my mind. MUSC. Medical University of South Carolina. My hospital. The place where I'd spent 30 years of my life, cutting open chests and rebuilding hearts. HVS. JHU. Johns Hopkins. Cole. Columbia. Harvard. Yale. Universities. Medical institutions. Nadine had filled an entire journal with codes that referenced the most prestigious medical collections in America, including mine. The vault suddenly felt smaller. The climate-controlled air pressed against my skin. Like a warning, I placed everything back on the shelves except the Polaroid, which I slid into my jacket pocket, and the journal, which I tucked under my arm. Then I locked the door, descended the stairs, and walked past the security guard without looking at him. The rental car felt like a confessional. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring through the fog at the street ahead. Then I pulled up the address Dr. Claiborne had given me, 741 Northwest Gleason Street. The place where Nadine had been found, 3.2 miles away. I drove slowly. The fog was thinning now, daylight burning through in pale columns. When I turned onto Gleason, I saw it immediately. A 3-story building of exposed red brick and tall industrial windows. Restored beautifully. The kind of work Nadine had spent her career doing. And across the entrance, in hand-painted lettering that looked like it had been there for years, a sign, Mercer and Fontaine Restoration. Established 2002, Mercer. Fontaine. His name and her maiden name. Not a business partnership hidden behind corporate filings. A declaration. Painted on a building, for anyone to see. For 22 years, Nadine's other life hadn't been a secret from the world. Only from me. The front door of Mercer and Fontaine Restoration was unlocked. I stepped into a reception area that smelled like linseed oil and aged wood. The particular perfume of objects being coaxed back from the edge of decay. White walls, polished concrete. Track lighting angled toward display cases holding restored pieces. A gilt-framed federal mirror. A mahogany writing desk with fresh shellac. and a glass-fronted Victorian medical cabinet, identical to one I'd seen in the MUSC archive during my teaching years. Same brass hinges. Same configuration. My hands went cold. A young woman at the reception desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm Mitchell Arden, Nadine's husband. I need access to her office." The practiced sympathy appeared immediately. "Of course, Mr. Arden. I'm so sorry. Let me check the authorized entry list." She tapped at her keyboard, then frowned. "I'm sorry. You're not on the authorized list. Only Miss Fontaine and Mr. Mercer have building clearance." "Miss Fontaine. Not Mrs. Arden." "Here." Nadine had used her maiden name. "Here. She'd never been my wife." "How long has Mr. Mercer been listed?" "Since the building was purchased in 2002, he's listed as co-owner." "Co-owner. Not contractor." Legal ownership of a building I'd never set foot in. Purchased the same year Nadine told me she was leasing a small workshop space in Charleston for supplies. A door behind the desk opened. A woman stepped through, early 40s. Dark hair pulled back, with a tortoiseshell clip. Canvas apron with restoration tools in the pockets. But her eyes carried something heavier than professional composure. She looked at me the way a nurse looks at a family member who doesn't yet know how bad it is. "I've been waiting for you," she said quietly. "I knew you'd come once you started finding things." Rosalind Pryor. Workshop manager for 11 years. Former emergency department nurse for 9 years before that. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes didn't waver. "We need to talk." "Not here." She led me through the workroom, past pieces in various stages of restoration, up a metal staircase that rang with our footsteps. Second floor. More workrooms. Design stations abandoned mid-project. Then the third floor. Rosalind used a master key to bypass the security panel. The door opened into what building plans would call an executive suite. It was a bedroom. King-size bed. Unmade. White Egyptian cotton sheets. High thread count. Cool to the touch. The same brand Nadine insisted on for our bed in Charleston. She'd maintained her preferences across both lives. A leather reading chair by the window. Built-in bookshelves filled with restoration manuals and auction catalogs. Men's reading glasses on the side table. And the closet. Open. Waiting. I walked toward it the way I'd once walked, knowing something terrible was about to become visible. 37 suits. Arranged by color and season on cedar hangers. Size 44 long. Dress shirts in dry cleaning plastic. A rack of ties. Leather shoes on built-in shelves. Polished. Cologne on the dresser. A shaving kit stamped with the initials CM in gold. This wasn't an affair conducted in hotel rooms. This was a home. A wardrobe. A parallel existence maintained with the same meticulous care Nadine brought to her restoration work. Every detail considered. Every surface tended. 22 years of Wednesdays and Fridays, furnished and polished and kept pristine, while I slept alone in Charleston texting her goodnight. "How long?" My voice came out hollow. "Since the beginning," Rosalind said from the doorway. She hadn't followed me in. Building permits filed in both their names, 2002. She told staff he was a silent business partner. A pause. Some of us knew better. I turned to face her. "You said you were waiting for me." She nodded, her jaw tight. "Because of what I saw the day Nadine died." She glanced at the ceiling corners, then back at me. I was in the main workroom, one floor below. I heard voices from Nadine's office around 2:30. Her and someone else. Door closed. At 2:38, something heavy hit the floor. I checked my watch. I remember the time exactly because of what happened next. She drew a breath that shook on the exhale. I ran in. Nadine was on the ground, conscious, but unable to speak. Left side drooping, classic hemorrhagic stroke. She held up her hands. 9 years, As an emergency nurse, Mr. Arden. I knew what I was looking at. I knew we had minutes, not hours. What happened? I reached for my phone to call 911. Her voice dropped, and the person already in the room stopped me. The air went still. Who? Rosalind looked at me with an expression I'd seen only once before, on a mother in my cardiac unit being told her child's surgery had gone wrong in ways she couldn't name. Your daughter. Audrey was here that afternoon. She grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave a bruise and told me to wait. Said her mother just needed a moment. That these spells passed. Rosalind's voice fractured. I should have called anyway, but she was Nadine's daughter, and she seemed so certain. So I waited. How long? 14 minutes. The entire time, Audrey was on her phone, texting someone, watching for replies. At 2:52, her phone buzzed. She read the message twice. Then she stepped aside and said 5 words. Rosalind swallowed. Okay, you can call now. Like she'd received permission. Someone had told my daughter it was acceptable to let her mother die on a timeline. The ER doctor said, if we'd called immediately, the medication might have worked. Rosalind whispered. After 14 minutes, the damage was catastrophic. She reached into her apron and pressed a business card into my hand. Her personal number, handwritten on the back. The workshop has its own security cameras. Nadine installed them on a separate system from the buildings. They captured everything. She moved toward the stairwell, then stopped. Meet me somewhere safe. Not here. They might be monitoring. She paused at the threshold. Her face half in shadow. Whatever you think you know about your wife, you're only seeing the surface. Your daughter knew exactly what she was doing in those 14 minutes, and she was waiting for someone to tell her when to stop. Rosalind insisted we meet outside Portland. Outside Charleston, too. Somewhere without cameras. Without connections. Without the possibility that someone might recognize either of us. That's how frightened she was. 2 days after the workshop, I sat across from her in a coffee shop in Savannah, Georgia. A neutral city, halfway between her life and mine. Watching her grip a mug of chamomile tea she hadn't touched. I made copies, she said without preamble. She pushed a sealed manila envelope across the table. My name was written across the front in black marker. One for you. One in a safety deposit box at a Wells Fargo on Broughton Street. Because once you see what's on this drive, people will want it destroyed. What's on it? Security footage from June 3rd. Nadine had cameras installed throughout the workshop on a system separate from building security, hidden in the crown molding. They run continuously. She folded her hands in her lap. Her knuckles were white. The cameras captured everything. Every angle. Every timestamp. 14 minutes and 23 seconds of footage that proves exactly what your daughter did while her mother was dying on the floor. I took the envelope. It was lighter than I expected. A single USB drive, holding the weight of everything. Why didn't you go to the police? Rosalind stared at her tea. Because your daughter is connected. Because the man she was texting, whoever gave her permission at 2:52, has resources I don't. Because 2 days after I made these copies, someone broke into my apartment in Portland. Nothing was stolen, but my laptop had been moved. My backup drives had been accessed. She looked up. Someone needed to know exactly what evidence I had. Who? I don't know. But I know this. Whatever happened to Nadine wasn't just a medical emergency that went wrong. It was managed. Timed. And your daughter was the one standing in the room making sure it happened on schedule. She stood, buttoned her coat, and left without finishing her tea. I sat there for a long time, holding the envelope, listening to the coffee shop's ambient noise fill the space where her voice had been. Then I drove 4 hours back to Charleston with the USB in my jacket pocket and a question turning in my skull like a blade on a lathe. Who was Audrey texting at 2:52? Joel was waiting at the kitchen table when I got home. He'd made coffee I couldn't taste. I told him everything. The vault, the Polaroid, The third floor, with its 37 suits. Rosalind's testimony about the 14 minutes. The USB I hadn't been able to bring myself to watch yet. He listened without interrupting. His face going through stages of grief I recognized from my years delivering bad news. Shock. Denial. The slow, terrible arrival of acceptance. Then my phone rang. FaceTime. Audrey. Joel caught my eye across the table and mouthed a single word. Answer. I accepted the call. Audrey's face filled the screen, all concern and careful sympathy. She was in her Washington apartment, the one Nadine had helped her furnish. Behind her, the abstract painting we'd bought for her 25th birthday. Dad, I heard you went to the workshop. Her voice was soft, worried, pitch perfect. Rosalind texted me. She said you seemed upset. You shouldn't be going through Mom's things alone. It's too soon. Rosalind had texted her. Of course. I wondered how many people were reporting my movements back to my daughter. I needed to understand some things, I said carefully. Your mother had business arrangements I didn't know about. What kind of arrangements? A co-owner. Someone named Caleb Mercer. Her expression didn't change. But something flickered behind her eyes. A calculation. The briefest realignment of strategy. Caleb Mercer? I don't know anyone by that name. She shook her head slowly. Mom never mentioned a business partner. Maybe it was just a financial arrangement. You know how she was about keeping work and family separate. There's a third floor, I said, watching her face the way I'd watch a cardiac monitor for arrhythmia. Private suite. Someone's been living there. A suite? Audrey tilted her head. Well, if there was a third floor situation, Mom probably kept the restoration equipment completely separate from the display cases. You know how particular she was about climate control for different materials. The kitchen went quiet. Joel's fingers stopped moving on his coffee mug. I could hear my own pulse. I never mentioned restoration equipment. I said slowly. Or display cases. I said there was a third floor, with a private suite. Her face froze. For 1 second, maybe 2. The mask of sympathetic concern cracked open, and I saw raw panic underneath. Then she recovered, laughing a beat too late. You just said workshop. I assumed the layout based on how Mom always organized her spaces. I said suite. Not workshop. Not equipment. Not display cases. You described specific details about a floor you've never been to. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Her eyes darted to something off-screen. I need to go. Client meeting. The screen went black. Joel closed his laptop and turned it toward me. While I'd been talking to Audrey, he'd been monitoring her social media accounts. His screen showed a real-time dashboard of her digital activity. Watch, he said. As I looked, Audrey's Instagram account began changing. Posts disappearing. Stories vanishing. The deletion was systematic and rapid. First her recent posts, then her cloud backup indicators flashing as files were purged. Joel clicked on a cached version of a post from May 20th, 3 weeks before Nadine's death. A selfie. Audrey in the foreground, the kind of casual shot she posted regularly. Caption: helping Mom with paperwork marathon. But in the background, slightly out of focus, was a desk. Nadine's desk at the workshop. And on that desk, clearly visible if you knew what to look for, was the leather appointment calendar open to a page showing 2 letters repeated down the column. C. M. She was there, Joel said quietly. At the workshop. With access to Mom's office. Her files. Her calendar. She knew about Caleb Mercer. My phone buzzed. Text from Audrey. Dad, I'm worried about you. Grief makes everything feel suspicious. Please get some rest. I typed back. Need to talk about your May 20th Instagram story. The one from Mom's workshop. 3 dots appeared instantly. Then my phone rang. Dad, listen. Audrey's voice was high and tight. That photo? It's not what you think. I was just helping Mom with some conservation records. Then why are you deleting it right now? Silence. I could hear rapid clicking in the background. The unmistakable sound of someone typing frantically. I'm not deleting anything. You're grieving and you're seeing. I can hear you typing, Audrey. Joel is watching your account in real time. We can see every post you're erasing. The clicking stopped. A long breath. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. The performance was over. You don't understand what you're looking at, she said flatly. Then the line went dead. Joel stared at his screen. The deletion counter was still climbing. Instagram, Facebook, iCloud, Google Photos. Years of digital history being systematically erased. She's not grieving, Dad, he said. She's running a cleanup operation. I watched the numbers tick upward. My daughter knew about the third floor. My daughter had been in her mother's office with access to every secret Nadine kept. And now, instead of explaining, she was burning the evidence as fast as her fingers could move. Whatever Audrey was hiding, it was bigger than a business partner she'd claimed not to recognize. And the 14 minutes of footage sitting in my jacket pocket had just become the most dangerous thing I owned. I called Audrey on FaceTime at 11 that night. She picked up on the second ring, her face lit by the pale glow of her apartment in Georgetown. Behind her, a row of museum monographs lined the shelf with the precision of a librarian's dream. She looked composed, rested, unbothered. Everything I was not. Dad, how are you holding up? She asked, tilting her head with the kind of rehearsed sympathy I'd seen her practice since childhood. The inflection was perfect. The timing was perfect. Everything about Audrey was always perfect. And for the first time in my life, that bothered me. I'm in Portland, I said. A beat of silence. Not long. Maybe half a second. But I am a cardiac surgeon, and I have spent 30 years reading the human body's involuntary responses. Her left eyelid twitched. Her jaw tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. She recovered instantly, but I had already seen it. Portland? Why Portland? I found a key in your mother's desk. It led me to a storage unit in the Pearl District. Unit spent. B. I let the words settle. And then I visited a building on Glisson Street. A restoration workshop. The sign on the door says Mercer and Fontaine. Audrey blinked twice. I don't know what that is. Fontaine is your mother's maiden name, Audrey. And Mercer is the man who called me at 2:38 on the day she died. The man who said he'd been with her every Wednesday and Friday for 22 years. I paused. Caleb Mercer. She shook her head slowly, the way someone does when they're constructing a denial in real time. Dad? Mom had a lot of professional contacts. She was involved in charity work, restoration projects. There's a Polaroid, I said, cutting her off. Your mother, Caleb, and a teenage girl. Summer, 2023. On the back, someone wrote Caleb, Nadine, and I. The handwriting looks like yours. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. In a courtroom, 4 seconds of silence after an accusation is a confession. In a FaceTime call between a father and a daughter, it is the sound of a mask cracking. I think you're exhausted, Audrey finally said. Grief does things to people. You're connecting dots that don't exist. Then explained Rosalind Pryor. Her lips parted. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the micro-expression of recognition before the conscious mind can suppress it. She knew the name. She absolutely knew the name. I don't know who that is. She works at the restoration workshop. 3rd floor. She told me something interesting about March 6th. She said you were in the room when your mother collapsed. She said you waited 14 minutes before anyone called 911. Audrey's composure fractured for exactly 1 second. I watched the muscles around her eyes contract, watched her nostrils flare, watched the tendons in her neck pull taut. Then, like a curtain dropping over a stage, the mask returned. Smooth, unreadable, professional. Rosalind is lying, Audrey said. Her voice was flat now, stripped of the sympathy she'd opened with. I was in Washington on March 6th. I have colleagues who can verify that. I have a USB drive, Audrey. Security footage from the building. Time-stamped. She stared at me through the screen for a long moment, and something shifted behind her eyes. A calculation. Cold and precise. Like a chess player recognizing that a critical piece has been captured. She didn't argue further about March 6th. She didn't ask what the footage showed. A person falsely accused would demand to see the evidence, would express outrage, would insist on their innocence with escalating intensity. Audrey did none of those things. Instead, she changed the subject. Dad, I think you need to come home. Joel and I can help you sort through Mom's things properly. Together. As a family. I ended the call 12 minutes after it began and sat in the dark of my hotel room, staring at the Portland skyline through rain-streaked glass. My hands were trembling, not from grief, from the recognition that my daughter had looked me in the eye and lied with the fluency of someone who had been lying for years. Joel called me 20 minutes later. He sounded wired, speaking in the clipped rhythm he used during trauma cases. Dad, something's happening. I've been monitoring Audrey's public accounts since you told me about the envelope. She just deleted her Instagram. All of it. 7 years of posts, gone in 15 minutes. He paused, and I got a notification from the family iCloud. She's removing files, photos, documents, contacts. She's wiping everything connected to Mom. I closed my eyes. Of course she was. Can you recover any of it? Some. The iCloud has a 30-day recovery window for recently deleted items. I've already started downloading what I can, but she's moving fast. She knows what she's doing. Joel worked through the night. By 3 in the morning, he had recovered 63 photographs and 14 documents before Audrey's deletions became permanent. Most of the photos were innocuous birthday parties, holiday dinners, Nadine's garden, but 7 of them were not. One showed Audrey standing in what was unmistakably the third-floor workshop, surrounded by partially restored furniture and shipping crates. Another showed Nadine's leather codebook open on a desk, the alphanumeric entries clearly visible. A third captured Audrey and Caleb Mercer at what appeared to be an auction house, both wearing lanyards with the name Fontaine Heritage Trust. The most damning image was a selfie. Audrey, smiling brightly, standing in Unit 7B. The same storage vault I had entered just hours earlier. Behind her, visible on the shelf, was the leather folder labeled Fontaine Heritage Plan. The photo's metadata showed it had been taken on the 12th of January 2024, 2 months before Nadine's death. She had known. She had always known. I forwarded every recovered file to Santiago Reyes and Rosalind Pryor. Then I opened the leather codebook and stared at the first entry. RCM 1847MUSC. My hospital, my world. Whatever Nadine and Caleb had built together, they had threaded it through the institutions I trusted most. I poured a glass of water from the hotel minibar and watched the Portland rain paint silver lines down the window. Somewhere in Georgetown, my daughter was erasing her mother's secrets. Somewhere in this city, Caleb Mercer was waiting. And somewhere in a leather journal, 47 coded entries pointed toward a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to find. But I was going to find it anyway. Santiago Reyes worked out of a converted firehouse in San Francisco's Mission District. The kind of building where exposed brick met dual monitors, and the coffee was always 12 hours old. I flew from Portland on a red-eye and arrived at his door at 7 in the morning. He was already awake, which I later learned was because he hadn't slept. I've been running your wife's name through every corporate database I have access to, he said, bypassing any greeting. He was a small man, wiry, with reading glasses perpetually pushed to the top of his head. His desk was buried under printouts, and 3 monitors displayed cascading spreadsheets. Mitchell, sit down. This is going to take a while. I sat. Santiago had spent the previous 48 hours pulling incorporation records from Oregon, Delaware, South Carolina, and Wyoming. The picture that emerged was not a picture of a woman with a side hobby. It was the architecture of a parallel empire. There are 3 LLCs, Santiago began, tapping the first monitor. The oldest is Fontaine Restoration Holdings, LLC, incorporated in Oregon on the 14th of April, 2002. Your wife is the sole managing member. The registered agent is an attorney named Victor Lang, who operates out of a small firm in Lake Oswego, just outside Portland. I didn't recognize the name. Victor Lang. Who is he? We'll get to him. Second entity. Mercer and Fontaine Properties, LLC, incorporated in Delaware on the 9th of September 2005. 2 managing members, Nadine Fontaine Arden and Caleb Mercer. This one holds real estate. 7 properties across Oregon and Washington, including the Pearl District building you visited and a warehouse in Tacoma. Santiago adjusted his glasses. Total assessed value across the portfolio: approximately $6.2 million. $6.2 million. My wife, who had told me she volunteered at a nonprofit 3 days a week, had quietly accumulated a real estate portfolio worth more than our Charleston home, our retirement accounts, and my surgical practice combined. Third entity. Santiago continued, pulling up the final screen. Fontaine Heritage Trust, LLC, incorporated in Wyoming on the 3rd of March 2015. This is the one that should worry you most. Wyoming. I knew enough about corporate law to understand why. Wyoming offered the strongest privacy protections in the country for LLCs. No public disclosure of members, no state income tax, no requirement to file annual reports with member names. It was the state where people hid money when they didn't want it found. The trust is structured as a dynasty trust with a delayed activation clause, Santiago explained. It doesn't become operational until a specific trigger date, the 1st of January 2025. On that date, the designated beneficiary gains full access to all assets held within the trust. Until then, the assets are managed by the trustees, Nadine Arden and Victor Lang. Who's the designated beneficiary? Santiago looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Audrey Arden. The room seemed to contract. I stared at the monitor as Santiago highlighted the relevant clause. The language dense with legalese, but the meaning perfectly clear. On the 1st of January 2025, 9 months from now, my daughter would inherit control of every asset funneled through 22 years of hidden business operations. How much? I asked. Santiago pulled up a summary spreadsheet. Across all 3 entities, including real estate, liquid accounts, receivables, and inventory conservatively, we're looking at between $8 and $12 million. But that's only what I can trace through public filings and bank records your wife's name appears on. He hesitated. There's a 4th layer I haven't been able to penetrate yet. What 4th layer? A health insurance fund. It appears in the Fontaine Heritage Trust's internal documents as a line item, Medical Provenance Reserve. The balance as of last quarter was $4.8 million. $4.8 million in a health insurance fund that I, a cardiac surgeon with 30 years at MUSC, had never heard of. The term Medical Provenance Reserve didn't correspond to any standard insurance instrument I knew. Provenance was a word used in art, in antiques. In museum curation, it referred to the documented history of an object's ownership. Why would an insurance fund use that word? Santiago was already ahead of me. I think it's not an insurance fund at all. I think Medical Provenance Reserve is a coded reference to the inventory your wife's codebook tracks. RCM 1847 MUSC HVS 1902J HU. Those aren't medical school affiliations. They're provenance chains. Registration numbers for items that pass through those institutions at some point in their documented history. The codebook. 47 entries, each one an alphanumeric sequence I had assumed was medical shorthand. Santiago was telling me they were inventory tags for objects, art, furniture, antiques, whose provenance had been laundered through legitimate institutions to disguise their origins. Your wife and Caleb Mercer weren't just hiding money from you, Santiago said quietly. They were running a provenance laundering operation. They acquired objects with questionable or incomplete ownership histories, routed them through restoration projects connected to real institutions, museums, universities, auction houses, and emerged with clean documentation that made the objects sellable on the legitimate market. I thought of the third floor of the workshop. The vintage suits, the leather tools, the smell of linseed oil and old wood. Rosalind had called it a restoration studio. It was a forgery shop. And Victor Lang? I asked. Victor Lang is the architect of all of it. He incorporated every entity. He drafted every operating agreement. He filed every tax return. And he has been collecting a management fee of 3% annually from each LLC since inception. Santiago showed me the payment records. Over 22 years, Victor Lang has personally received approximately $1.4 million for keeping your wife's secrets. I stood and walked to the window. The Mission District was waking up below delivery trucks, joggers, a man hosing down a sidewalk outside a taqueria. Ordinary life. The kind of life I thought I'd had. There's one more thing, Santiago said behind me. I tried to contact Victor Lang yesterday. Left 3 messages. On the 4th attempt, his office manager picked up and said, Mr. Lang was unavailable, and that any inquiries regarding the Fontaine entities should be directed to, he read from his notes, Miss Audrey Arden, designated successor trustee. I turned from the window. Audrey is already listed as successor trustee since 2022. Your wife added her 2 years ago, which means Audrey hasn't just known about the LLCs. She's been positioned as the next person in line to run them. The rain had stopped outside. A thin band of sunlight cut across Santiago's desk, illuminating the stack of printouts that documented 2 decades of deception. My wife had built a hidden empire. My daughter had been groomed to inherit it, and the attorney who made it all possible was hiding behind privilege and refusing to speak. I picked up the codebook from Santiago's desk and opened it to the first page. 47 entries. 47 stolen histories, waiting to be decoded. Where do we start? I asked. Santiago poured 2 cups of cold coffee and slid one toward me. We start with the money. Follow the transfers. Every dollar your wife moved left a fingerprint. We find the fingerprints. We find the truth. Santiago didn't sleep that night either. By the time I woke on his office couch at 5 in the morning, he had printed 46 pages of wire transfer records and arranged them chronologically across the floor like a surgical timeline. He was kneeling among them when I opened my eyes, a yellow highlighter between his teeth and a red pen behind each ear. 23, he said without looking up. 23 what? 23 transfers over 19 years. Every one of them authorized with your signature. And every one of them is forged. I got off the couch and knelt beside him. The documents were bank authorization forms, standard wire transfer requests from our joint accounts at First National Charleston. Each one bore my name, my account number, and a signature that looked, at first glance, exactly like mine. The amounts varied. $47,000 in 2005, $210,000 in 2011, $385,000 in 2017, $612,000 in 2021. The total, which Santiago had circled in red at the bottom of a summary sheet, was $4.2 million. She traced your signature, Santiago said. Probably from checks, tax returns, or closing documents. The forgeries are excellent. Consistent pressure. Natural variation between samples. No obvious mechanical reproduction. Whoever did this either had extensive practice or professional training. I picked up the 2011 transfer. $210,000, wired from our joint savings to an account at Columbia Pacific Bank in Portland, held in the name of Fontaine Restoration Holdings, LLC. My signature sat at the bottom of the page, confident and familiar. I had not signed it. I had never seen this document. I had never authorized this transfer. But the bank had processed it, and the money had moved. Where did the money go after it hit the LLC accounts? I asked. Santiago stood and walked to the second monitor, where he had mapped the flow of funds using forensic accounting software. The diagram looked like a circulatory system, arteries branching into capillaries, each node representing an account, each line a transfer. The pattern is consistent across all 23 transactions, he explained. Money leaves your joint account at First National Charleston. It lands in Fontaine Restoration Holdings in Portland. Within 72 hours, a portion is transferred to Mercer and Fontaine Properties in Delaware. From there, a third transfer moves funds to a previously unidentified entity. He tapped a node at the bottom of the diagram. Mercer Antiquities LLC, incorporated in Nevada. Sole member, Caleb Mercer. 3 hops. My money traveled through 3 shell companies before landing in Caleb Mercer's personal business account. Each hop added a layer of distance, a layer of legitimacy, a layer of difficulty for anyone trying to trace the origin. It was textbook layering, the same technique used in money laundering operations worldwide. The Nevada entity is where the actual purchases happen. Santiago continued. Mercer Antiquities buys objects at estate sales, private auctions, and occasionally from overseas dealers. The objects enter the Mercer and Fontaine workshop in Portland for restoration. During restoration, new provenance documentation is created, condition reports, ownership histories, authentication letters, all designed to give the objects a clean paper trail. And then they're sold? Through legitimate auction houses and private dealers, yes. Christie's, Sotheby's, Bonhams, and several regional houses. The profits cycle back through the LLC structure in reverse, ultimately landing in the Fontaine Heritage Trust in Wyoming. Santiago paused. Which activates on the 1st of January 2025, giving Audrey full control. I sat down heavily in Santiago's desk chair. $4.2 million had been siphoned from accounts I monitored, from a bank where I knew the branch manager by name, through forgeries so precise that no compliance officer had ever flagged them. Nadine had stolen from me slowly, methodically, over nearly 2 decades. And she had done it with my own signature. There's a complication, Santiago said, and his voice carried a weight that made me look up. Under federal law, the account holder whose signature appears on a wire transfer is considered the authorizing party unless proven otherwise. These documents show your name, your signature, and your account. If the FBI or the DOJ opens an investigation into the provenance laundering operation, which they will, once we involve law enforcement, you could be charged as a co-conspirator. The word landed like a scalpel on bone. Co-conspirator. I had spent 30 years building a reputation at MUS, performing cardiac surgeries that saved lives, mentoring residents, publishing in peer-reviewed journals. And now, a dead woman's forgeries could paint me as a participant in international art fraud. How do we prove the signatures are forged? I asked. Forensic document examination. We need an FDE, a board-certified handwriting analyst, to compare the questioned signatures against your known exemplars. If the expert can demonstrate inconsistencies in pen pressure, stroke sequencing, or baseline alignment, we can establish forgery. Santiago pulled up a name on his screen. I've already contacted Dr. Eleanor Voss at Stanford. She's one of the top 5 FDEs in the country. She can have a preliminary opinion within 10 days if we overnight the originals. 10 days. In 10 days, Audrey could destroy more evidence. Victor Lang could shred more files. And Caleb Mercer could move assets offshore. But without the forgery analysis, I was exposed a sitting target for prosecution. There's something else, Santiago said. He pulled up a scanned document from the Fontaine Heritage Trust files. The trust contains a clause I almost missed. Page 19, paragraph 4. It states that if the primary grantor Nadine dies before the activation date, the successor trustee assumes immediate fiduciary responsibility for all trust assets pending the January trigger. Audrey. which means she doesn't have to wait until January. She already has fiduciary access. She can move money, liquidate assets, authorize sales, all under the legal cover of her trustee role. I thought about the deleted Instagram posts, the wiped iCloud files, the selfie in Unit 7B. Audrey wasn't just covering her tracks. She was consolidating control while I was still trying to understand the game. We need to freeze those accounts, I said. Santiago nodded. That requires a court order, which requires an attorney willing to go up against Victor Lang and whatever firm he's connected to. He slid a business card across the desk. The name read, Evelyn Marsh, partner, Whitfield Marsh, and Associates, Charleston, SC. Specialization, complex estate litigation. She's the best in the Southeast, Santiago said, and she owes me a favor. I picked up the card. The paper was thick, cream-colored, authoritative. The kind of card that belonged to someone who won cases. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and looked at the fund flow diagram still glowing on Santiago's monitor. My money, branching through 3 states, 4 entities, and 22 years of deception. Call her, I said. Santiago was already dialing. Victor Lang's office occupied the 2nd floor of a Victorian house in Lake Oswego, 15 minutes south of Portland. The building had been painted dove gray with white trim, and a brass plaque beside the front door read Lang Legal Services, Est. 1998. It looked like the kind of place where people signed wills and closed on starter homes. It did not look like the headquarters of a 22-year fraud operation. I arrived with Santiago at 9 in the morning, 4 days after the forgery discovery. Evelyn Marsh had filed preliminary motions in Charleston the previous afternoon, emergency petitions to freeze the 3 LLC accounts pending forensic review. The court had scheduled a hearing for the following week. But Victor Lang had called first, requesting an in-person meeting to resolve the estate matters amicably and avoid unnecessary litigation. His exact words: Santiago had advised me to go, to listen, to say as little as possible, and to sign nothing. A receptionist led us to a conference room on the 2nd floor. The table was mahogany, polished to a mirror finish. A water pitcher sat in the center beside 4 crystal glasses. The room smelled faintly of Nadine's perfume Shalimar, the same fragrance she had worn for 30 years. The scent hit me like a physical blow. For a disorienting moment, I expected her to walk through the door, smile at me, and explain everything away. She didn't. Audrey did. My daughter entered from a side door, dressed in a navy blazer and white silk blouse, her hair pulled back in a low chignon. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with the deliberate calm of someone who had been briefed. Behind her, Mana. I did not take it. Mr. Arden. Thank you for coming, Victor said, settling into the chair at the head of the table as though this were his courtroom. I understand this is a difficult time. My goal today is to simplify matters for everyone. He opened a document box and withdrew a bound volume white cover, spiral binding, 68 pages. He slid it across the table toward me. The title page read, Comprehensive Estate Settlement and Power of Attorney Instrument. In the matter of the estate of Nadine Fontaine Arden. This instrument consolidates all outstanding estate matters into a single agreement, Victor explained. It addresses the disposition of jointly held assets, the management of your wife's independent business interests, and the ongoing administration of the Fontaine Heritage Trust. My client, he gestured toward Audrey, has authorized me to offer terms that are, I believe, more than fair. Santiago had already pulled on reading glasses and was turning pages. I watched his expression as he moved through the document, neutral at first, then increasingly still, the stillness of a man encountering something he had expected but hoped not to find. Page 43, Santiago said to me quietly. I turned to page 43. The section was titled, Irrevocable Assignment of Managing Authority. The language was dense, layered with subordinate clauses and cross-references, but Santiago had taught me to read legal documents the way I read cardiac imaging. Look for the anomaly, the thing that doesn't belong. And there it was, buried in paragraph 6. The clause granted Audrey Arden sole, irrevocable, and unconditional authority over all entities associated with the Fontaine Heritage Trust, including Fontaine Restoration Holdings LLC and Mercer and Fontaine Properties LLC. The authority would be retroactive to the date of Nadine's death. It could not be revoked, challenged, or modified by any party, including me. And it required only one signature to activate. Mine. You want me to sign away control of everything, I said. Victor adjusted his glasses. I want you to acknowledge the structure your wife established during her lifetime. These entities were her creation, funded by her efforts, managed by her vision. The instrument simply formalizes what already exists. Funded by her efforts, I repeated. With $4.2 million forged from my accounts. The room went quiet. Audrey's gaze dropped to the table for a fraction of a second. Not guilt, I realized, but recalculation. She was adjusting her strategy in real time. Victor recovered first. I'm not aware of any allegations regarding the source of funding, and I would caution against making unsubstantiated claims that could complicate an already sensitive process. Santiago closed the document and removed his glasses. Mr. Lang, I have 46 pages of wire transfer records showing funds moved from Mr. Records, Arden's joint accounts to your client's LLCs over a period of 19 years. Every transfer bears a signature that my forensic document examiner believes is forged. I also have corporate filings from 4 states showing you as the registered agent for all 3 entities, collecting a 3% annual management fee. He paused. Would you like me to continue, or would you prefer to discuss the terms under which you might cooperate with the forthcoming investigation? Victor's composure held, but I saw it the same involuntary response I had seen in Audrey during our FaceTime call. A tightening around the eyes, a momentary cessation of breathing, the autonomic nervous system betraying what the conscious mind refused to show. This meeting is concluded, Victor said. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and placed both hands on the table. Any further communication should be directed to my office in writing. Attorney-client privilege applies to all matters discussed here today. Privilege doesn't cover fraud, Santiago said mildly. Audrey stood and gathered her portfolio. She looked at me for the first time since the meeting began, a long, measured look that carried no warmth, no apology, no recognition of the man who had raised her. It was the look of an opponent assessing a threat. Dad, she said, and the words sounded foreign in her mouth. You don't understand what Mom built. You never did. That's why she didn't tell you. She walked out. Victor followed. The conference room door clicked shut behind them, and the faint trace of Shalimar lingered in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. Santiago gathered the 68-page document and placed it in his briefcase. We don't sign, he said. We file. Evelyn's motions hit the Charleston court on Monday. We request an emergency freeze on all 3 LLCs and a judicial review of the trust instrument. He looked at me. This was their first attempt. It won't be their last. I stood at the window and watched Victor and Audrey cross the parking lot below. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. They moved with the coordinated silence of people who had rehearsed this moment and understood that it hadn't gone according to plan. The Shalimar faded. The room returned to mahogany and crystal and the quiet hum of an air conditioner. I picked up my jacket and followed Santiago to the car. Monday was 3 days away. I intended to be ready. Caleb Mercer came to Charleston on a Tuesday. He drove a black Ford F-250 with Oregon plates and parked it in my driveway at 6 in the evening, as casually as a neighbor returning a borrowed tool. I watched him from the kitchen window, tall, broad-shouldered mid-50s, with the kind of weathered tan that comes from years of outdoor work. He wore a canvas jacket over a flannel shirt and moved with a slow, deliberate confidence that told me he was not a man who hurried for anyone. I opened the front door before he knocked. We stood 3 feet apart, separated by the threshold of a house he had helped finance with money stolen from my accounts. He looked at me, the way a contractor looks at a building he's about to demolish, measuring, calculating, already seeing what comes after. Mitchell Arden, he said. Not a question. A confirmation. Caleb Mercer. He nodded. We should talk. I let him in because Santiago had told me to. Let him talk. Santiago had said over the phone that morning. People who show up uninvited are people who feel their position weakening. They offer things. Listen to what he offers, and we'll know what he's afraid of losing. We sat in the living room, the room where Nadine and I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners for 28 years, where Joel had taken his first steps, where Audrey had opened Christmas presents with a precision that now seemed less charming and more diagnostic. Caleb declined coffee. He sat on the edge of the sofa, forearms on his knees, hands clasped, a man ready to negotiate. I'm going to be direct, he said. Your wife and I built something together. It took 22 years, and it has value. Significant value. I'm not here to apologize for that, and I'm not here to explain it. I'm here because what we built is about to be destroyed by lawyers and courts and people who don't understand what they're looking at. I think I understand exactly what I'm looking at, I said. Caleb studied me for a moment. You understand the surface. You found the storage unit, the workshop, the LLCs. You've got a forensic accountant pulling threads, but you don't understand the network, and you don't understand the relationships that hold it together. He paused. I'm offering you $3 million. Clean money, wired to any account you choose within 48 hours. In exchange, you sign over your interest in the 3 LLCs and the Heritage Trust, and you walk away. $3 million. The number hung in the air between us like a surgical instrument. Precise, sharp, designed to cut cleanly. It was more money than I would earn in the next 5 years of cardiac surgery. It was also, I understood, a fraction of what the operation was worth. And if I don't, Caleb leaned back slightly. His expression didn't change, but his voice dropped half a register. Then complications arise. About March 6th, for instance. About what happened in that building, and who was present, and what the timeline actually looks like when examined by people less sympathetic than a small-town coroner. The threat was elegant in its vagueness. He wasn't saying he would fabricate evidence. He wasn't saying he would lie. He was saying that the truth about March 6th, the 14 minutes, the delayed call, the circumstances of Nadine's death could be shaped, interpreted, and presented in ways that would cause me damage. A wrongful death investigation. A malpractice inquiry into why a cardiac surgeon's wife died of a brain hemorrhage without timely intervention. Questions I couldn't answer because I had been 2,800 miles away, drinking Earl Grey in a house built on lies. I'll think about it, I said, because Santiago had told me to never refuse on the spot. Caleb stood. At the door, he turned and pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket. He held it up, a snapshot of Audrey at perhaps 4 years old, sitting on Caleb's shoulders at what looked like a county fair. She was laughing. He was looking up at her with an expression I recognized because I had worn it myself 1,000 times. It was the expression of a father. She has my eyes, Caleb said. Nadine's smile. But my eyes. You've always known that, haven't you? Somewhere in the back of your mind, you've always seen it. He placed the photograph on the hall table and walked to his truck. The engine turned over. The headlights swept across the front of the house. And then, he was gone. I stood in the hallway holding a photograph of my daughter on the shoulders of a man who might be her biological father, and the ground beneath my feet felt less solid than it had 5 minutes earlier. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan making its slow revolutions, counting the seconds between each pass of the blade. At 1:47 in the morning, I heard a sound from the guest room down the hall, Audrey's room, the room she always stayed in when she visited from Washington. She had arrived that afternoon, ostensibly to help with estate paperwork. She had been quiet at dinner, polite to Joel, careful not to mention Victor Lang or the meeting in Lake Oswego. The sound was her voice, low and urgent, speaking into a phone. I moved silently down the hallway in bare feet. a skill I had developed during decades of early morning hospital rounds, and stood outside her door. The wood was thin enough to hear fragments. The biology question is handled. Victor filed the policy amendment in 2019. If they test, the results go through his office first. A pause. January still works. The activation is automatic. Once the trigger date hits, the trust funds release regardless of any pending litigation. Another pause. Longer. Caleb, listen to me. He's a surgeon, not a lawyer. He'll run out of energy before he runs out of money. We just need to hold the line until January. I stood in the dark hallway, barefoot on hardwood floors Nadine had chosen, listening to my daughter coordinate with her biological father to steal my dead wife's hidden fortune. The biology question. The policy amendment. The January activation. Each phrase was a brick in a wall I hadn't known existed. A wall built between me and the daughter I had raised, loved, and apparently never known. I returned to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The ceiling fan continued its rotations. The house settled around me with the small sounds of an old Charleston home creaking wood, ticking pipes, the distant murmur of the harbor. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary house that had become a theater of extraordinary betrayal. I picked up my phone and texted Joel 3 words. We need DNA. His reply came in 11 seconds. Already thinking the same thing. I can run it through Musk's lab. Discreet. 40. 8 hours. I set the phone down and lay back on the pillow. In the guest room, Audrey's voice had gone silent. Somewhere in Oregon, Caleb Mercer was driving his black truck through the night. And in a Wyoming trust document, a trigger date waited like a time bomb, the 1st of January 2025, 183 days away. Joel called me from the MUSC laboratory at 6:14 in the morning, 41 hours after I had texted him. He had used a hair sample from Audrey's guest room pillow and a buccal swab I had provided from my own cheek. The test was a standard paternity panel, 16 genetic markers compared across 2 profiles. It was the same test I had ordered thousands of times for patients in pre-surgical genetic screening. I knew how to read the results before Joel said a word. 0%, Joel said. His voice was flat, clinical, the voice he used when delivering news to families in the trauma ward. 16 markers tested. 0 shared alleles beyond statistical background. You are not Audrey's biological father. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had poured 20 minutes earlier and not touched. The morning light came through the east-facing windows and fell across Nadine's potted orchids on the sill plants she had tended every Sunday for as long as I could remember. I stared at the orchids and absorbed the number. 0%. The mathematical confirmation of what Caleb Mercer's photograph and Audrey's midnight phone call had already told me in the language of instinct. There's more, Joel continued. I ran the sample against a reference profile. Santiago obtained a DNA sample from Caleb Mercer through a coffee cup collected during surveillance outside his hotel in Charleston. The comparison shows a paternal match at 99.97% certainty. 99.97. In medicine, we call that diagnostic. There is no ambiguity at 99.97. Caleb Mercer was Audrey's biological father. He had always been her biological father. And Nadine had brought her into our home, given her my name, raised her at my table, and never said a word. Dad, Joel said after a silence that lasted longer than either of us intended. Are you okay? No, I said. But I need you to send the results to Santiago. And I need you to pull something else for me. What? Nadine's medical records from 1992. Our fertility workup. We did it at MUSC before we started trying for children. The records should still be in the archive system. Joel paused. That's over 30 years ago. The digital archive only goes back to 1995. Then check the paper archive. Basement level 2. Section G. I helped design the filing system during my residency. The records are there. It took Joel 11 hours. He called me back at 5:30 that evening, and this time, his clinical detachment had cracked. I could hear the edge of something raw beneath his words. Not anger exactly, but the particular disorientation of a person whose understanding of the world has been fundamentally rearranged. "I found the fertility workup," he said. "Dated the 14th of September 1992. 3 months before you and Mom got married. What does it say?" "The report shows bilateral tubal occlusion. Mom's fallopian tubes were blocked." The consulting physician noted that natural conception was, he paused, reading directly, "highly unlikely without surgical intervention or assisted reproductive technology." There's a handwritten note in the margin from the attending. It says, "Patient informed, declined further evaluation." Nadine had known in September 1992 that she could not conceive naturally. We were married in December 1992. Audrey was born in August 1993, 8 months after the wedding. The arithmetic was simple and devastating. Nadine was already pregnant when she walked down the aisle. She was pregnant with Caleb Mercer's child, carrying the proof of her infidelity beneath a white dress and a bouquet of gardenias. And she had used a fertility report to ensure I would never question the timeline. If I believed conception was difficult, I would consider any pregnancy a miracle rather than a deception. "She planned it from the beginning," I said. Joel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. "There's one more thing. Santiago cracked Victor Lang's email server this afternoon. Don't ask me how. He found a thread between Victor and Nadine dating back to March 2022. Santiago had forwarded the emails to my phone while Joel and I were speaking. I opened them at the kitchen table, scrolling through 27 messages exchanged over a 2-year period. The correspondence read like a project management timeline. The 12th of March 2022. Nadine to Victor. "It's time to bring A into the structure. She's ready. Schedule the trustee amendment for next quarter. The 3rd of April 2022. Victor to Nadine. Amendment filed. A. Arden is now designated successor trustee for Fontaine Heritage Trust, LLC. Effective immediately upon your incapacity or death." The word incapacity stopped me. Not death alone. Incapacity. Nadine had built the trust to transfer control, not just if she died, but if she became unable to manage it, as though she anticipated a medical event that would remove her from the equation. I scrolled further. The emails grew more urgent in late 2023, the 8th of November 2023. Nadine to Victor. The neurologist confirmed progressive vascular deterioration. Timeline uncertain but likely within 18 months. Accelerate the January protocol. The 15th of December 2023. Victor to Nadine. January protocol confirmed. All assets will consolidate under Heritage Trust by Q4 2024. Activation remains the 1st of January 2025. A. has been briefed. The 6th of January 2024. Victor to Nadine. Neurologist update requested. If timeline accelerates, we may need to move the activation forward. A. is prepared for either scenario. Nadine had known she was dying. Not in the abstract way that all of us know we are dying, but in the specific clinical way a neurologist had told her that the blood vessels in her brain were deteriorating, that the clock was running, that the end would come as a hemorrhage or a stroke. She had received this diagnosis in November 2023 and had told Victor Lang. She had not told me. She had not told Joel. She had told her attorney and her daughter, her biological father's daughter, and together they had accelerated the timeline for transferring every hidden asset into Audrey's hands before the inevitable collapse. The 6th of March 2024. The day Nadine's brain hemorrhaged in a Portland workshop while Audrey stood in the room and waited 14 minutes to call for help. Victor's January 6 email echoed in my mind. If timeline accelerates, we may need to move the activation forward. A. is prepared for either scenario. Either scenario. The words carried a weight. that settled into my chest like a stone. Had Audrey been prepared for her mother's death, or had she been instructed to let it happen? I closed the email thread and set the phone face down on the table. The orchids on the windowsill caught the last of the evening light. Nadine had watered them every Sunday. She had cared for living things with patience and tenderness while systematically dismantling the life of the man who loved her. I picked up the phone and called Evelyn Marsh. "We file everything," I said. "The DNA, the fertility records, the emails, all of it." "Mitchell," Evelyn said carefully, "once we file, there's no going back. This becomes public. Audrey's paternity, Nadine's medical history, the fraud, all of it, enters the court record." "I know. And you're prepared for what that means? For Joel? For yourself?" I looked at the orchids. One of them was beginning to wilt, a single petal curling inward, retreating from the light. "File it," I said. "All of it." Evelyn Marsh filed 3 motions simultaneously on a Monday morning in Charleston County Probate Court. I know they were simultaneous because she told me timing mattered. If Victor Lang received notice of one filing before the others hit the docket, he would have time to move assets, alter documents, or coach witnesses. So Evelyn coordinated with 2 associate attorneys, each standing in a different clerk's office at 8:59 in the morning, and at 9 o'clock sharp, all 3 motions entered the system within 40 seconds of each other. The first motion requested an emergency freeze on all accounts associated with Fontaine Restoration Holdings LLC, Mercer and Fontaine Properties LLC, and Fontaine Heritage Trust LLC. The motion cited Santiago's forensic analysis, the 23 forged wire transfers, and the fund flow diagram showing money laundered through 4 states. The second motion requested a judicial audit of all 3 entities by an independent forensic CPA, with authority to subpoena bank records, tax filings, and corporate correspondence. The third motion sought to disqualify Victor Lang as the registered agent and legal representative of any entity connected to the Arden estate on grounds of conflict of interest and potential complicity in fraud. Evelyn called me from the courthouse steps at 9:12. "It's done," she said. "The judge has 48 hours to rule on the emergency freeze. The audit and disqualification motions will be calendared within 2 weeks." She paused. "Mitchell, I want you to understand something. Once a freeze order is granted, Audrey loses access to every account in the trust structure. She won't be able to write a check, authorize a transfer, or liquidate a single asset. For someone who has spent the last 2 years being groomed to control a multi-million-dollar operation, that is going to feel like the walls closing in." "Good," I said. "Not good," Evelyn corrected. "Dangerous. Cornered people do unpredictable things, especially cornered people with media training and public sympathy." I didn't understand what she meant until Wednesday. At 2:17 in the afternoon, Audrey posted a video on Instagram, 3 minutes and 12 seconds long, filmed in soft, natural light, in what appeared to be her Georgetown apartment. She wore a cream sweater and minimal makeup. Her hair was down. She looked, by any objective measure, like a grieving young woman trying to hold herself together. The performance was flawless. "My mother built something extraordinary," Audrey began, her voice steady, but carrying the faintest tremor calibrated. I now understood. To convey vulnerability without weakness. She came from nothing. Her father was a house painter in rural Oregon. Her mother cleaned offices at night. And from that beginning, my mom created a restoration business that preserved American heritage furniture, art, architecture that would have been lost without her work. She paused and looked down, as though collecting herself. The pause lasted exactly 2 seconds, long enough to register emotion, short enough to maintain narrative momentum. "Now, in the weeks after her death, my father is trying to destroy everything she built. He has hired lawyers to freeze her accounts, seize her business, and erase her legacy. He is doing this not because he loved her, but because he is angry that she had a life he didn't control." The camera held steady on her face as she delivered the final line. My mother was not a criminal. She was a woman who refused to be invisible. And I will not let anyone reduce her life's work to a court filing. The video spread with the velocity of a brush fire in dry country. By Thursday morning, it had been shared 18,000 times, 53,000 likes, 2,200 comments, the vast majority sympathetic to Audrey. Stay strong, Queen. Your mother sounds incredible. Narcissistic fathers destroy what they can't control. The narrative had been set. Audrey was the dutiful daughter protecting her mother's memory, and I was the vindictive husband trying to punish a dead woman. Joel called me Thursday afternoon. Dad, have you seen the comments? I've seen them. There are news outlets picking it up. A reporter from the Charleston Post and Courier left a message at my apartment. She wants a quote about the family dispute over Nadine Arden's estate. He sounded exhausted. What do we do? Evelyn answered that question in a conference call an hour later. She had brought in a media consultant named Harris Webb, a former CNN producer who now worked with high-profile litigation clients. Harris was blunt. You don't respond publicly, he said. Every word you say becomes ammunition. Audrey controls the emotional narrative right now. Young woman, dead mother, powerful father. That story writes itself. If you engage, you become the villain in a story that 50,000 people have already decided they understand. So we just let her lie? Joel asked. We let her talk, Harris said. And we build the evidentiary record in court, where lies have consequences. Public opinion is a weather system. It changes. Court orders don't. Santiago joined the call from San Francisco. He had spent the previous 72 hours analyzing the financial data from a different angle, tracking not where the money went, but where it came from before it reached my accounts. I found something, Santiago said. 3 of the properties held by Mercer and Fontaine Properties LLC were purchased using funds that originated outside the United States. Wire transfers from a numbered account in Zurich, routed through a correspondent bank in the Cayman Islands, and deposited into the Delaware LLC. The amounts total $1.7 million over 6 years. The room went quiet. International wire transfers through numbered Swiss accounts and Caribbean correspondent banks meant one thing. This was no longer a domestic estate dispute. It was an international financial investigation, the kind that attracted the attention of the FBI, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and potentially Interpol. We need a federal prosecutor, Evelyn said. Someone with experience in cross-border asset recovery and art crime. I know someone, Santiago said. Former assistant U.S. attorney, out of the Southern District of New York. She prosecuted the Medici Antiquities case in 2019. Her name is Catherine Solano. She's in private practice now, but she consults with the DOJ on provenance fraud cases. Evelyn agreed to make the call. Harris began drafting a media strategy that involved saying nothing, the most difficult strategy of all. Joel returned to his shift at MUSC, and I sat alone in my kitchen, watching Audrey's video play on my phone screen for the 7th time, studying her face the way I had once studied cardiac rhythms on a monitor. She had called Nadine a woman who refused to be invisible. But invisibility had been Nadine's greatest talent. She had hidden in plain sight for 32 years, hidden her lover, her daughter's paternity, her business empire, her medical diagnosis, and her plan to transfer everything to the child who carried another man's DNA. She had been the most visible, invisible woman I had ever known. And now her daughter was using that same talent, standing in soft light, wearing a cream sweater, and building a wall of public sympathy that no court order could freeze. I couldn't sleep again. It was becoming a pattern, the nights stretching into white, airless corridors where my mind replayed evidence, like a surgeon reviewing preoperative imaging, turning each frame, searching for the detail that would make everything click. At 2 a.m, I sat at the kitchen table with Nadine's leather codebook open under the pendant light, a pot of cold coffee beside me, and a legal pad covered in my own handwriting. 47 entries. each one a string of letters and numbers separated by hyphens. I had been staring at them for days, and the pattern had refused to reveal itself. Santiago believed they were provenance chains registration numbers for objects that had passed through institutional collections. But which institutions? The codes didn't match any standard museum accession format I could find online. I started with what I knew. RCM1 847 MUSC. The last segment, MUSC, was the Medical University of South Carolina, my hospital. I had walked its corridors for 30 years. But MUSC was a medical institution, not a museum. Why would a provenance code reference a hospital? Then I remembered. MUSC's Waring Historical Library maintained a collection of antique medical instruments, rare books, and pharmaceutical artifacts dating back to the 18th century. The collection was small, scholarly, and largely unknown outside academic circles. I had attended a reception there once, years ago, and Nadine had come with me. She had spent 45 minutes examining a set of Civil War surgical tools behind glass while I talked to colleagues. At the time, I thought she was being polite. Now I understood she had been working. If the last segment was the institution, the first segment might be the object's identifier within that institution's catalog, and the middle number might be the year of origin or acquisition. RCM. I opened the Waring Library's online catalog on my laptop and searched. The system was antiquated, a text-based interface that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2003. But after 20 minutes of searching, I found it. RCM 1847 corresponded to a rosewood chest of medical instruments crafted in 1847 by a Philadelphia silversmith. The chest had been donated to the Waring Library in 1923 and was listed as deaccessioned 2019. Deaccessioned. The word meant the object had been officially removed from the library's permanent collection. In museum practice, deaccessioning was legitimate institutions regularly sold or transferred objects that no longer fit their mission. But the process required board approval, documentation, and transparent transfer of ownership. If the deaccessioning had been legitimate, there would be a paper trail showing where the chest went and who acquired it. If it had not been legitimate, the chest had simply disappeared from the collection, and the codebook was the only record of where it ended up. I worked through the night, cross-referencing each code against publicly available institutional catalogs. By 5 in the morning, I had decoded 31 of the 47 entries. The pattern was consistent and devastating. HVS 1902, JHU, a set of Hepplewhite surgical cabinets, 1902, formerly in the Johns Hopkins Medical History Collection, deaccession 2017. PKL 1863 COL, a pair of Civil War era prosthetic limbs crafted in Philadelphia, 1863, formerly in Columbia University's Medical Archives, deaccessioned 2020. WTR 1889 HAR, a watercolor anatomical atlas, 1889, formerly held by Harvard's Countway Library. Status listed as on extended loan borrower, unspecified. Every entry pointed to the same pattern. Objects of historical and monetary value, held by prestigious academic institutions, quietly removed from collections through deaccessioning or indefinite loans, and absorbed into the Mercer and Fontaine network. The objects were not paintings or sculptures, they were medical antiques, scientific instruments, rare books, items that occupied a niche market where expertise was scarce and provenance was difficult for outsiders to verify. Santiago had been right about the laundering mechanism. The objects entered the Portland workshop with questionable ownership histories and emerged with meticulously forged documentation, condition reports, conservation records, ownership chains that made them sellable through legitimate auction houses. But I now understood something Santiago had missed. The objects didn't just pass through institutions. They were taken from institutions. And the person positioned to facilitate that extraction was someone with curatorial access, institutional credentials, and the trust of museum administrators. Audrey. I turned to the final 16 entries, the ones I hadn't been able to decode. Their institutional suffixes were unfamiliar. SMI, PBD, NGA. I typed SMI into a search engine, and the first result confirmed what I had begun to suspect. SMI was the internal code used by the Smithsonian Institution for interdepartmental transfers. Audrey worked at the Smithsonian. She had been hired as an assistant curator in the American Art Division 3 years ago, a position Nadine had celebrated with champagne, and a weekend trip to Washington. I had been proud. My daughter, 23 years old, working at the most prestigious museum complex in the country. Now I understood that the job was not a career achievement. It was a placement. Nadine and Caleb had positioned Audrey inside the Smithsonian, the way an intelligence agency positions an asset inside a foreign government, with patience, planning, and a very specific operational objective. The entry IRM 2024SM I appeared near the bottom of the codebook, written in fresher ink than the others. IRM 2024, an object acquired or targeted in 2024, connected to the Smithsonian. The acquisition was either in progress or planned for the near future. If Audrey was facilitating the removal of objects from the Smithsonian's collection, the legal consequences extended far beyond estate fraud. The Smithsonian was a federal institution. Theft from a federal institution was a federal crime, prosecutable under Title 18 of the United States Code, carrying penalties of up to 10 years in prison. I photographed every page of the codebook and emailed the images to Santiago, Evelyn, and Catherine Solano with a single line of explanation. 47 items. Estimated value $8 to $12 million. Audrey is the conduit. Santiago responded in 4 minutes. This changes everything. Conference call at 8. I closed the codebook and set it on the table beside my cold coffee. The kitchen window was beginning to lighten the first gray suggestion of dawn over Charleston Harbor. I had spent the night dismantling my daughter's career, her credibility, and her freedom. Every decoded entry was a nail in a case that would send her to federal prison. And I felt nothing that resembled satisfaction. I felt the particular emptiness of a man who has performed a necessary surgery and knows the patient will never be the same. The pendant light hummed above me. The orchids on the windowsill had lost another petal during the night. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., my daughter was sleeping in an apartment paid for with stolen provenance, dreaming whatever dreams are dreamed by people who believe they will never be caught. At 7:45, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. At 8 o'clock, I dialed into the conference call. At 8:03, Catherine Solano said the words that turned the case from an estate dispute into a federal investigation. I'm calling my contacts at the FBI Art Crime Team. This goes beyond fraud. This is institutional theft on a national scale. The codebook sat open on the table, its 47 entries glowing under the kitchen light like a map to a country I never knew existed. The package arrived on a Thursday afternoon, left on my front porch without a return address. It was wrapped in brown craft paper and tied with kitchen twine, the kind of wrapping that belonged to another era, deliberate and handmade. Inside was an 1,876 medical text titled The Physician's Companion, a manual of surgical practice, published in Philadelphia by J.B. Lippincott. The leather binding was cracked but intact, the pages foxed with age. It was beautiful in the way that all objects which have survived their century are beautiful. Tucked between pages 114 and 115 was a handwritten letter. The stationery was plain white, college-ruled, torn from a spiral notebook. The handwriting was careful, and round the penmanship of someone young who had been taught to write neatly and still practiced it. The letter was signed Iris Mercer, Caleb Mercer's daughter, 15 years old. I sat on the porch and read it twice before going inside. Dear Mr. Arden, my name is Iris Mercer. I am Caleb Mercer's daughter. I am 15. I'm writing because I think you deserve to know what I know, and because no one else is going to tell you. I was in the building on March 6, not in the room in the workshop downstairs, doing homework. I heard Rosalind yell. I ran upstairs and saw your wife on the floor. Audrey was standing near the window. She was holding her phone. Rosalind was on her knees next to your wife, calling her name. I asked if I should call 911. Audrey said no. She said she was handling it. She kept texting. I watched the clock on the wall. 14 minutes passed before Rosalind finally grabbed the phone and called. I told my father what happened. He told me to forget it. He said it was complicated and that I was too young to understand. But I am not too young to understand that 14 minutes is a long time when someone is dying on the floor. The book I'm sending you was in my father's office. It has a code on the inside cover, PKL1863COL. I think it belongs to someone else. I think a lot of things in my father's office belong to someone else. I'm sorry about your wife. I'm sorry about everything. Iris. I set the letter down on the kitchen table and opened the medical text to the inside cover. There, written in pencil in Nadine's handwriting, was the code PKL1863COL, the same code from the leather codebook Columbia University's Medical Archives, an object deaccessioned in 2020. The book in my hands was stolen property, and a 15-year-old girl had mailed it to me because her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent. I called Evelyn Marsh within the hour. She read the letter over the phone, and when she finished, the line was quiet for 10 seconds. This changes the courtroom strategy. Evelyn said, "We have an eyewitness to the 14 minutes, a minor, which complicates things. But her testimony corroborates Rosalind's account and the surveillance footage. I want to introduce the video in the hearing next week." The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday in courtroom 4 of the Charleston County Courthouse, a room I had passed 100 times on my way to the hospital across the street, but had never entered. The emergency freeze motion, the forensic audit, the disqualification of Victor Lang. All 3 motions would be heard together, and Evelyn intended to present the 14-minute surveillance video as supporting evidence for the freeze. Tuesday arrived with the stillness of a surgical morning, the kind of quiet that precedes an irreversible procedure. I wore a navy suit. Joel sat beside me in the gallery. Evelyn stood at the petitioner's table with Santiago. Across the aisle, Audrey sat between Victor Lang and a second attorney. I didn't recognize a woman in her 40s with sharp features and a briefcase monogrammed with the initials HK. Audrey wore a gray dress and pearl earrings. She looked composed. She looked ready. Evelyn presented the financial evidence, first Santiago's forensic analysis, the wire transfer records, the forged signatures, the LLC structure. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Calloway, reviewed each exhibit with the methodical patience of someone accustomed to complexity. Victor Lang's attorney objected 11 times in 40 minutes. Judge Calloway overruled 9 of them. Then Evelyn introduced the video. Your Honor, the petitioner submits Exhibit 14, a 14-minute surveillance recording captured on the 6th of March 2024 at the Mercer and Fontaine Restoration Workshop in Portland, Oregon. The footage has been authenticated by a certified forensic video analyst and bears continuous, unaltered timestamps. The courtroom monitor flickered to life. The footage was grainy, security camera quality, fixed angle, no audio. But the images were clear enough. 2:38 p.m. Nadine stands near a workbench on the 3rd floor, speaking to someone off camera. She raises her left hand to her temple. Her knees buckle. She collapses. 2:38 and 22 seconds. p.m. Rosalind Pryor enters from the left side of the frame, running. She drops to the floor beside Nadine, checks her pulse, tilts her head back to clear the airway. 2:38 and 41 seconds. p.m. Audrey enters from the right side of the frame. She is holding a phone. She looks at Nadine on the floor. She looks at Rosalind. She does not kneel. She does not approach. She raises the phone and begins typing. 2:39 and 15 seconds p.m. Rosalind looks up at Audrey and appears to speak. Her mouth moves rapidly, her free hand gestures toward Nadine. Audrey does not respond. She continues typing. The minutes that followed were the longest minutes I have ever watched. The timestamp advanced in the lower right corner of the screen, with the indifference of a machine counting seconds that meant nothing to it and everything to the people in the room. Rosalind performed chest compressions. She repositioned Nadine's head. She looked up at Audrey again and again, her mouth moving with increasing urgency. Audrey stood near the window, phone in hand, typing, pausing, typing again. 2:45 p.m. 7 minutes. Rosalind stands and moves toward Audrey. Audrey steps back and raises one hand, a gesture that clearly says, stop, or wait, or not yet. 2:49 and 33 seconds. p.m. 11 minutes. Rosalind returns to Nadine. Her movements are slower now, her compressions less forceful. She is exhausted. 2:52 and 23 seconds p.m. 14 minutes and 23 seconds after Nadine's collapse. Audrey lowers the phone. She nods once. Rosalind grabs her own phone from her pocket and dials. The screen went black. Courtroom 4 was silent. Not the performative silence of people waiting for the next act, but the genuine silence of human beings confronted with something they cannot immediately process. Judge Calloway removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. The court reporter's fingers hovered above the keys without moving. Santiago leaned into the microphone. Your Honor, the 14-minute delay was not confusion. It was coordination. Miss Arden was communicating with parties whose identities we are currently tracing through cell tower records and message metadata. We believe the delay was deliberate and synchronized with instructions received in real time. I looked across the aisle at Audrey. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the dark monitor. She did not look at me. She did not look at Victor. She did not move. And in that absolute stillness, I recognized something I had seen once before in the operating room, when a patient's heart stops and the monitors go flat, and there is a moment, before the crash team moves, when the room holds its breath, and everyone understands that what happens next will determine whether someone lives or dies. Audrey had anticipated this video. She had prepared for it. And whatever her next move was, it was already in motion. The courtroom reconvened at 9 the following morning. Judge Calloway had reviewed the video overnight and entered a preliminary order granting the emergency freeze on all 3 LLC accounts. Victor Lang's disqualification motion was deferred pending further briefing. But the freeze alone changed the physics of the case. Every dollar in the Fontaine network was now locked behind a judicial wall, and Audrey's fiduciary access had been severed like a clamp on a bleeding artery. Audrey's new attorney, the woman with the monogrammed briefcase, whose name turned out to be Helen Kowalski, a white-collar defense specialist from a Washington firm, stood to address the court. Your Honor, Miss Arden does not dispute that she was present at the Portland workshop on March 6th. She does not dispute that there was a delay in contacting emergency services. What she disputes is the characterization of that delay as deliberate or coordinated. Helen paused, adjusting her glasses. Miss Arden suffers from a documented dissociative condition. Acute stress. Induced depersonalization triggered by traumatic events. On March 6th, witnessing her mother's collapse triggered a dissociative episode during which she was unable to process external stimuli or respond to verbal commands. The texting behavior visible on the footage was perseverative motor activity, not intentional communication. It was an elegant defense. Clinical, sympathetic, and nearly impossible to disprove without direct neurological examination. Evelyn had anticipated something like it. Your Honor, Evelyn responded. The petitioner acknowledges Miss Arden's claimed condition and does not wish to litigate her medical history at this stage. However, we note that the content of the text messages sent during those 14 minutes messages we are currently seeking through discovery will determine whether the behavior was dissociative or deliberate. We asked the court to compel production of Miss Udati, Arden's phone records for March 6, 2024. Judge Calloway granted the request. Helen Kowalski did not object, which told me the phone had already been wiped, or the messages moved to a server they believed was beyond the court's reach. Then Helen made her move. Your Honor, the respondent calls as a witness Iris Mercer, age 15, daughter of Caleb Mercer, who was present in the Portland workshop on March 6th, and whose written statement has been referenced by the petitioner. The words landed in my chest like a fist. They wanted to put Iris on the stand. A 15-year-old girl who had risked her father's anger to mail me a letter and a stolen book, and now Audrey's legal team wanted to drag her into a courtroom. Under oath, in front of cameras and attorneys, and a father who had told her to forget what she saw. Evelyn was on her feet instantly. Your Honor, the petitioner strenuously objects. Iris Mercer is a minor. She is not a party to this proceeding. Her written statement was submitted as corroborating evidence, not as testimony. Compelling a 15-year-old child to testify in a proceeding involving her own father's potential criminal liability raises serious constitutional and ethical concerns. The child's statement is already part of the record, Helen countered. The respondent has a right to cross-examine the source of that statement. If the petitioner relies on Iris Mercer's account, the respondent is entitled to challenge it. Judge Calloway raised one hand, a gesture that silenced both attorneys immediately. I will take this under advisement. No minor will be compelled to testify in my courtroom without a guardian ad litem review and my personal approval. We recess until 2 o'clock. During the recess, I found Evelyn in the hallway outside the courtroom. She was leaning against the marble wall with her arms crossed, staring at the floor with the focused intensity of someone running calculations. They're not trying to discredit Iris, Evelyn said without looking up. They're trying to intimidate her. If she knows she might be called to testify, she stops cooperating. A 15-year-old facing her father in court, most adults couldn't handle that pressure. We can't let that happen, I said. Evelyn looked at me. It won't. Catherine is filing a federal motion to designate Iris as a protected witness under the child witness protection provisions. If the court grants it, her identity is sealed. Her testimony is taken via closed deposition, and Caleb Mercer is barred from the room during her statement. And if the court doesn't grant it, then we withdraw her statement from the record and build the case without it. I will not put a child in the crossfire to win a motion. I nodded. It was the right answer. It was the only answer. The afternoon session brought the final revelation. Catherine Solano had spent the recess coordinating with Evelyn's associates, and at 2:15, Evelyn rose and addressed the court with a new exhibit, a set of 43 emails extracted from Victor Lang's office server by Santiago's forensic team under the authority of the discovery order. Your Honor, these emails span the period from January 2020 to March 2024. They document Mr. Lang's direct and knowing participation in the creation, management, and concealment of the Fontaine LLC network. They include instructions to forge transfer authorizations, correspondence regarding the fabrication of provenance documents, and communications with Mr. Clodens. Caleb Mercer regarding the acquisition and resale of objects identified in the petitioner's codebook exhibit. Victor Lang sat 3 rows behind Audrey. I turned to look at him as Evelyn read excerpts into the record. His face had gone the color of wet plaster. His hands gripped his knees with the white-knuckled tension of a man watching his career collapse in real time. The most damaging email was dated the 14th of February 2024, 3 weeks before Nadine's death. Victor to Nadine. If the neurological event occurs before January activation, we implement the accelerated protocol. A. Takes control of all entities under the successor trustee clause. All provenance files transfer to the Portland vault. I will handle the Charleston filings. The only variable is Mitchell. If he discovers the structure before activation, the entire framework is at risk. The only variable is Mitchell. I had been reduced to a variable in my own wife's equation, an obstacle to be managed, a risk to be mitigated, a man whose discovery of the truth was the single greatest threat to a conspiracy that had been running for 22 years. Judge Calloway ordered Victor Lang's immediate referral to the South Carolina State Bar for investigation. His law license was provisionally suspended pending review. 2 United States Marshals appeared at the courtroom entrance not to arrest Victor, but to escort him to a federal interview room where Catherine Solano's former colleagues at the DOJ were waiting. Victor stood. He buttoned his jacket with hands that trembled visibly. He did not look at Audrey. He did not look at me. He walked between the 2 marshals and through the courtroom doors, and the doors swung shut behind him with the soft finality of a chapter ending. Audrey watched him go. For the first time since the proceedings began, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not guilt, but the cold recognition of a person who understands that the structure beneath her is crumbling and that the person who built it has just been removed from the board. She turned to Helen Kowalski and whispered something I couldn't hear. Helen nodded once. Audrey straightened in her chair, adjusted her pearl earrings, and faced forward. The game was not over. But the architect had been unmasked, and the building was beginning to fall. They arrested Audrey on a Friday morning in Georgetown. 2 FBI agents from the art crime team served the warrant at her apartment at 7:15. She was dressed for work. White blouse, navy trousers, Smithsonian badge clipped to her belt. She did not resist. She placed her wrists together and held them out as though she had been rehearsing the gesture for weeks. The agents cuffed her, walked her to the elevator, and drove her to the federal courthouse in Alexandria, where she was booked on 4 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of interstate transportation of stolen property, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit theft from a federal institution. Bail was set at $750,000. Helen Kowalski posted it within 2 hours. Audrey walked out of the courthouse in the same white blouse, her face a mask of composed indifference that the cameras captured and broadcast to every news outlet in the country. The internet could not decide whether she was a villain or a victim, and that ambiguity kept the story alive for weeks. Caleb Mercer was arrested the following Monday at the Portland workshop. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts and received 18 months of federal incarceration, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Victor Lang cooperated fully. The state bar suspension and the prospect of prosecution dismantled whatever loyalty he once felt toward Nadine's ghost. Over 6 weeks, he provided Santiago and Catherine with complete records of the LLC network, the provenance pipeline, and the financial architecture he had maintained for 22 years. He was disbarred, sentenced to 2 years of probation, and fined $350,000. The plea negotiations for Audrey lasted 3 months. In October, she agreed to plead guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. The sentencing hearing took place on a Tuesday in November in Alexandria. I sat in the gallery beside Joel. Santiago was in the back row. Catherine stood at the prosecution table. Judge Robert Ellison reviewed the case file before addressing Audrey directly. Miss Arden, you participated in a conspiracy spanning more than 2 decades, defrauded your adoptive father of millions of dollars, facilitated the theft of cultural property from federal and academic institutions, and stood in a room while your biological mother suffered a fatal medical emergency and chose to send text messages rather than call for help. He paused. The text messages recovered from your phone records show coherent, strategic communication with Caleb Mercer and Victor Lang during the 14 minutes in question. Dissociation does not produce coherent strategy. The court sentenced Audrey to 5 years of federal supervised probation, 2,000 hours of community service, full restitution of all funds traceable to the Fontaine LLC network, and a lifetime ban from employment at any federally funded cultural institution. Santiago estimated the total recovery at approximately $9.8 million. The 47 stolen objects would be returned to their institutions through a process managed by the FBI art crime team. In December, I signed the paperwork to dissolve all 3 LLCs. Evelyn handled the filings. Santiago oversaw the asset transfers, and on a cold Tuesday morning, I stood in a lawyer's office in Charleston and watched the last signature dry on the last document, and the empire Nadine had built in shadow ceased to exist. I used a portion of the recovered funds to establish the Arden Heritage Restoration Center in Bend, Oregon, a nonprofit dedicated to the ethical restoration and preservation of American historical artifacts. The center publishes its provenance records publicly and employs a staff of 12, including 3 apprentice conservators recruited from community colleges in the Pacific Northwest. Rosalind Pryor serves as director of operations. Iris Mercer moved to Portland to live with her maternal aunt. Catherine's federal motion had been granted. Iris's identity as a witness was sealed, her deposition taken in a closed room with a guardian ad litem present. She enrolled at Lincoln High School and joined the science club. In February, she submitted an essay to a national conservation scholarship competition titled The Ethics of Ownership: Who Belongs to What We Preserve. She won first place. I paid for her college fund anonymously through a trust administered by Evelyn's firm. She doesn't know yet. She will. Eventually. Joel completed his trauma nursing certification in the spring. He calls me every Sunday. We talk about his shifts, his patients, the weather. We do not talk about Nadine often, but when we do, we talk about her honestly, not as a saint and not as a monster, but as a woman who contained contradictions so vast that no single story could hold them all. I still live in the Charleston house. I still drink Earl Grey at dawn. The orchids on the windowsill died in September. I never had Nadine's touch with living things, and I replaced them with a small ceramic vase Joel made in a pottery class. It sits in the same spot, catching the same morning light, holding nothing but air and the memory of what used to grow there. Some mornings I sit at the kitchen table where I decoded the codebook, where I read Iris's letter, where I watched my life disassemble and reassemble into something unrecognizable. I drink my tea, I watch the harbor, and I think about what Rosalind told me in that Savannah cafe. Whatever you think you know about your wife, you're only seeing the surface. She was right. The love was real. The deception was real. The 28 years of Thanksgiving dinners and quiet evenings on the porch, those were real. And the 22 years of forged signatures, stolen objects, and a daughter who carried another man's DNA, those were real too. Both truths exist. Both truths are permanent. And the work of living after betrayal is not choosing which truth to believe. It is learning to hold them both without being destroyed. The truth will cost you something, but lies will cost you everything. If you are sitting in a house that feels unfamiliar, holding evidence of a life you didn't know existed, I want you to know this. You are not broken. You are not foolish. You are a person who trusted, and trust is not a weakness. It is the most human thing we do. The restoration is not about the objects, it is about the self. And it begins the moment you decide that knowing is better than not knowing, even when knowing changes everything.